think that's most of everyone that we were expecting today. So let's get started. Morning, everyone. My name is Tina. I am the head of ad tech here at IAB UK, and I'm your host for the Programmatic webinar part 1. So welcome to you all. I hope you all are keeping safe and well and are kind of getting familiar with these kind of regular, more virtual meetings. And welcome to you all. We move on to the next slide. So I'm sure most of you are already quite familiar with the way webinars work, but just in case you're not, at the bottom of your screen or the top, depending on the setup of your screen, there is a Q&A function. So throughout this meeting, if you have any questions, please do feel free to use that box and to ask questions to either ourselves or to any of the speakers, and we can get back to you on those. If we move on. In terms of the agenda today, so we've got 3 speakers talking to us about different topics going on within Programmatic. So we are aiming to finish here today at about 10:15, and we've got 3 speakers lined up before then. We've got speakers from PubMatic, from Adsquare, and from Shopck, and talking about cookieless world, measurement, and mobile in-app. Move on. Before we get started, it would be great if we had a picture of who all is joining us today. So there's just a quick poll that should have appeared on your screen now. And if you could please just inform us what company type you are attending from. You should be able to just click it and press submit. We'll just give it a minute or so for everyone to answer. How are the polls looking, Frankie? Maybe if we pull up the results. Great, so quite a good split across the board. Kind of, yeah, fairly even, but with a slight majority from the agency side. Welcome to you all. I'll now pass on to our first speaker, who is Lisa, Senior Director of Advertiser Solutions at PubMatic, who's going to be talking to us about unlocking the opportunities in a post-cookie world, given that the world is and the industry is moving away from the third-party cookie. Lisa, over to you. Lisa, you're on mute.
Yep. Yes, I am on mute. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yep.
Okay, cool. So I stole Daniel Knapp's idea and changed my Zoom background. So wishing that we could all go to a lovely place like this soon. Anyways, thank you everyone for joining this morning. Over the past year, the major topic of industry chat and innovation has been identity. Leaving to Mexico last year, there was not a single meeting that did not include the question of what is your strategy for identity. As browsers like Firefox and Safari eliminated cookies, I think they were a bit sick of the cookie-only diet, and agencies looked to use only IE and Chrome to run campaigns. The cookie pool was quickly diminishing, cookie data was crumbling and expiring quickly, and new solutions had to evolve. Now, obviously, identity has taken a backseat and has been replaced with coronavirus, and not a minute of our day goes by without that being mentioned. But we figured it was more important to discuss identity and not get caught in a brand safety filter about COVID-19. Next slide, please. So what exactly is identity? Identity is about your digital footprint, tracking your activities and behaviors, and creating advertising and content that is more relevant for you. It links to consumers' unique profile with necessary information to be able to measure, control, and follow up with personal ads on their behavior. Like when we call someone, we need a number. When we ship something, we have to know where to send it. And when we meet somebody, we usually like to know what their name is. However, within software systems and all of the capabilities that the internet offers today in terms of personalization from shopping carts and e-commerce, UGC, custom content, and much more, the cookie is the only mechanism within the web world for managing and tracking this today. The cookie was actually established by the World Wide Web Consortium, otherwise known as W3C, 25 years ago, and it has not changed. As a result of that, we've seen some major growing pains. It's amazing that the internet has advanced tremendously in terms of the features and capabilities it is offering, even things like my Zoom background. But the component for understanding who we are and as individuals and even down to our privacy preferences goes back down to that simple cookie. Next slide. In the most recent Cisco annual report, they projected that the number of devices connected to IP networks will climb to more than 3 times the global population by 2023, with 3.6 network devices per capita. Consumer share of total connected devices and connections will expand to nearly 75% of the entire market, Cisco predicts, with businesses actually only representing 1/4 of those IP devices and connections. In order to develop a good and solid solution, access to all those data points collected from first, second, and third parties, it is required for a view of the consumer's identity and travel in this competitive environment. It's essential that brand marketers understand which online devices and offline behaviors belong to a consumer, as well as who that consumer is. Next slide. Now, in the real world, prior to quarantine, of course, we arrive at a conference and you register and get your name tag. So I'd have a name tag that says Lisa. And now everyone I meet will know my name. But on the internet, everyone you meet at this conference must write your name on their own notes and press it on you, whether they know your real name or not. So after a while, you might walk around and look like this Post-it lady with 30 Post-its or name tags. But if you meet someone new, then they can't see any of those Post-its, so they need to create a new one. And let's say I meet a person named Maya, as I did 5 minutes ago. She can only see the note she wrote just now, not the previous one. And then I meet Maya for a third time in this virtual conference. But now she decides that I will be called Sarah and put a new Post-it on me. And I may not like the name Sarah. So I decide to just clear my cookies and have no Post-its. Since I cleared my cookies and removed that note and didn't want to be called Sarah, we both stand at square one. No one knows anything about who I am, who Sarah was, and now everyone I've met over the past day at the conference will need to recreate that name tag. Next slide, please. Back to that point of having your diet be only cookies. Customer data is scattered through the enterprise, often residing in silos that hinder the marketer's ability to develop and nurture relationships. A consumer might use different identifiers to research something on one device, call on another, and buy something in the store. Each of these identifiers can live in a different department with unrelated collections and matching requirements. Next slide. So how do we actually move past that cookie? Connecting consumer identifiers has become crucial for marketers. Already we can do things like attribution, frequency capping, and audience ingestion without cookies. Short term, brands and agencies working in this capacity have the opportunity to maximize their reach and performance across browsers such as Safari and Firefox. When there are no third-party cookies in any of these browsers, this approach delivers a privacy-first environment for buyers and sellers to trade within. Next slide. Now, as we can see, it's an arms race between the browsers and ad tech, where the consumers is at the center, and it's an increased focus on privacy. The key question here is how together we can create the right experience for the consumer, focusing on the open web. Next slide, please. As the war continues between browser versus ad tech, this is a great example of that. You can see here that already 1/3 of the traffic within the UK is blocked from cookies, as that covers from Firefox and Safari. Within the next 2 years, including Chrome in that will grow to 91%. Can we as an industry rely on reaching only 70% or below of that audience? Next ad, please. There are great benefits to those who take action. This image illustrates what a view is worth based on the information available. So if you don't have a cookie ID, then you index at 100. If you have a cookie or a device ID, then the value increases by 1.9. With the alternative ID and the additional data that's included, it goes up to 3.6 times. Next slide. So the goal of the future is to develop a better solution for advertisers, not a quick fix for third-party cookies, but a solution where open internet has the same or better control and measurability as walled gardens. Thinking about working better together, the move away from cookies is empowering the walled gardens, and as an industry, that will deteriorate the open web we have all worked so hard to build. The way forward for everyone is to collaborate like we did for header bidding. Next slide. Solving for identity across the open web is not a one person, one company, or even one part of the advertising ecosystem issue. It will require feedback, adoption, and coming together from demand partners, publishers, tech partners, as well as agencies and brands. Currently, there's a wide range of solutions. We've bucketed them down into 3 types. So you have Real IDs, which works for publishers who can get that kind of data from their users. Examples like LiveRamp and Brightpool. Then you have simplified cookie-based approaches, which is a standard ID solution that lives in first-party context in environments that does not allow third-party cookies, like Digitrust and ID5. Then you have probabilistic ID solutions, which creates IDs based on data from traffic, like Parable. Next slide, please. So in all of this, we have PubMatic's Identity Hub. We like to think of it as an enterprise solution based on pre-bids user ID modules, which includes easy-to-use analytics, customer support, and a quick UI. It allows publishers to quickly and seamlessly support multiple IDs for each ad impression, thereby ensuring that buyers can recognize the publisher's audience and bid more on its inventory, maximizing publisher revenue, buyer campaign performance, and revenue. Uncovering a true identity solution requires industry-wide collaboration. Identity allows publishers and advertisers to have the same holistic view of a consumer, which is the only way to ensure advertising is personalized and optimized for that individual consumer. Now we have some case studies for you. Next slide, please. So you can see here, with the ID solution, a publisher over a 30-day period saw an increase of 376%. Now, additional data that another publisher saw in APAC over a 7-day period is implementing the solution. They saw an increase of 153% for bid rate, an eCPM lift of 72%, and a revenue lift of 2,631%. That's quite an increase in revenue. Next slide, please. Now for some buy-side data. So a DSP implemented a universal an ID solution, and through that, they saw their win rate go up from 2% to 10%. They saw an increase of 189% in spend, and an increase in 103% from an opportunity standpoint. Next slide, please. So looking at identity, as a consumer, you will have the ability to decide how you manage your data and identity over the digital ecosystem. You can opt in or out, you can choose what you share with and with whom. From an advertiser perspective, they have the benefit to select which ID solutions are best for them, increase ROI on campaigns with better controls, manage target audiences all over the open internet via the IDs and DSPs that they choose from. From the publisher benefit, as we have seen in the data, higher fill rates and higher CPM. The spend will shift away from those walled gardens into that open web. And it can work with the multiple ID at the same time and optimize those control possibilities. Next slide, please. As you can see, there is hope. We have already seen great success with the likes of implementing the Trade Desk ID, Net ID, as well as a few others. Next slide, please. So the right solution here is the one that the entire industry can stand behind. An identity that everyone can use, every player in the space that works with consumers, identifies consumers, and doesn't create conflict of interest or competitive concerns. It should be a standard that supports innovation. An open ID is that building block that we need. If anyone should own it, it should be the consumer. Verification does not need to rely on cookies to detect fraud, deliver brand safety, or measure viewability. Next slide, please. Oh, yep, that one. So be part of the conversation. It's in the best interest of advertisers and the buy side to continue to transact across their key partners and properties and continue to watch and learn. To completely abandon premium content providers to go strictly with the walled gardens is a potential pitfall as bidding for audiences becomes more crowded and you lose out on unique brand association. By staying part of the conversation, actively engaging in organizations such as the IAB, for Digitrust and Project Reorg and prebid.org, and electing to transact using the major ID solutions and help accelerate learnings and development. Going beyond audience targeting, sharing insights and details on conversion and attribution will also be helpful. And expanding efforts, shifting budgets into app and CTV will help make sure a future solution is applicable for emerging formats. Next slide. Thank you everyone for your time. Let us know if you guys have any questions.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, we'll hold a kind of a minute or so to see if there are any questions in the Q&A. Oh, also, just Lisa, I mean, thank you. You've kind of mentioned so many bodies of work throughout the IAB. So if anyone is interested in getting involved in any of those through your IAB UK membership, please do email me directly at tina@iabuk.com or adtech@iabuk.com. But get in touch if you'd like to get involved. So thank you, Lisa, for
no problem.
Very nice.
Thank you for having me.
Can't see any questions at the moment. I'll hold a second longer. I mean, I really appreciated your virtual background, by the way. I'm actually supposed to be in Cyprus today. So this is my throw to.
Yes, you can feel like you're in Cyprus.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there doesn't seem to be any questions. I think you've covered it all very well.
Great.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Tina.
Great.
Bye.
I will now, actually, sorry, Lisa, we have had one question come in. I don't know if you're still there.
I'm still here.
Okay, perfect. I know that there are a few people from PubMatic on the phone, so if the question's not relevant to you, then anyone can kind of jump in. But so thanks, Lisa. Fantastic summary. As part of this solution, a user would have to agree to an ID that's linked to numerous publishers. Would this be a challenge considering data usage related to GDPR?
My initial thought on that, and I am not the GDPR expert at PubMatic, but I don't believe that it would be.
Great.
Because
yeah, I think it just from the conversations I've had, I think it depends on well, I guess if the user has agreed and they have consented, then the consent is the only thing that you needed to be able to process personal data on their behalf. But again, not a GDPR expert. But
yeah, we can definitely take this one back and come back to it with after speaking to some GDPR experts on that. But I don't think that it would be an issue because I think that once you agree as a consumer to consent, then you're good to go.
That's what I understood it to be as well. Great, thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
I will now pass on to our second speaker, who is Andy Beams, who is the General Manager for UK at Adsquare. And Andy is going to be talking about measuring footfall and the success of drive to store campaigns. I'm guessing not many people are going to store at the moment, but given that 90% of all purchases kind of pre-corona were taking place in store, measuring footfall is a very important insight. So we'll now pass it over to Andy, who's going to be talking to us about that in a bit more detail. Over to you, Andy.
Wonderful, thank you, Tina. I'm just to check, everyone can see my screen, everyone can hear me?
We can see you and hear you, perfect, thank you.
Perfect, I've made that mistake before. I've been talking to myself for a few minutes. Okay, so yeah, very different topic here, and one is an interesting time to be talking about this, but I largely want to talk about footfall and various applications, whether that's around campaign management, campaign measurement for drive to store campaigns, which is will become a more topical conversation again in Q3, I hope, or whether it's around consumer movement from an insight perspective, which is potentially more interesting right now. There are a couple of bits that I want to cover, and then from a store visit attribution point of view, I want to lay out what I see as the 5 foundations for effective campaign setup and best practices. But first of all, so a bit of an introduction in case anyone is not as familiar with Adsquare. I'm struggling to. There we go. Next slide. So Adsquare as a business is a data exchange. We house data from a variety of different vendors. where we are fairly unique is the types of data that we house. It's not just data that is linked to a cookie or a mobile device ID. It also takes in movement data in terms of location, all background SDK source location data. Yes, there's audience data linked to mobile device IDs, but also quite uniquely spatial data, by which I mean anything that is geo-contextual data is tied to a postcode or a geography in some capacity. So that could be an Axiom or Experian or a MasterCard that's all tied to kind of residential postcodes. We're able to onboard and use all those for a variety of products. And we sit here in the center of the ecosystem. So the data that we work with at the top of the screen, just a few examples. We facilitate that data in various buying platforms for advertisers is a simple form. I say there's just a small selection of the data partners, the platforms we work with, and the advertisers that we work with. But it is facilitating that workflow, and in theory for a number of different products. What I want to talk about today is that center one, talking about audience targeting and insights is perhaps a slightly different conversation for a different day. I want to look purely at the measurement and the footfall side of what Adsquare offer. But before I get into the specifics of campaign measurement, I do want to talk about this. This obviously has a COVID-19, the current pandemic has a huge kind of impact and implication for consumer movement, for visits to, well, pretty much anywhere. It's not about a mile from your house, but into certain retail stores that are closed, in the proximity to poster sites. It's had a huge impact on consumer movement. And to that end, in the last week or so, Adsquare have launched the footfall monitor, which is delightfully referred to internally as FOMO. But this is free to use. This is on our website, so please do feel free to go and check out this. If the data there is useful to you or to your business, it is free to access. Please do take a look. But what we are essentially tracking here, in 5 or so markets in Europe and North America, and in a variety of different verticals, from coffee shops to airports to supermarkets, etc., is the weekly change in visits from a pre-corona lockdown baseline. So, and what you're looking at there, it's hard to make this one out, is lots of lines going down, essentially. No one will be surprised to hear that. Lots of them have established themselves as a new normal, to kind of taken 4 or 5 weeks to drop to the bottom, and then it's kind of going along a fairly flat trough. What this is potentially useful to use for is to measure and look out for the kind of green shoots of recovery. And if I look at this particular example, which is UK supermarkets, what you're seeing, and this is the live version's perhaps a week or so more up to date than this, but you'll see 2 weeks in, it starts to drop dramatically. And then by week 4, which is the 23rd of March, which is just at the start of the lockdown, individual visits to supermarkets dropped quite dramatically. And then this line continues to be fairly flat after that. Now, as I say, that data is there and it's free to access. There are obviously a number of interested vendors, media owners, out-of-home companies, media agencies, etc., brands that are then using more custom versions of this data to understand whether they are more impacted than the rest of the market or their competitors, but also to use this going forward to understand what the green shoots of recovery might look like when footfall to certain places start to pick up. Out-of-home companies certainly find this very useful to understand which parts of their real estate, which posters are getting more traffic than others, which ones are still valuable to agencies, and how that might start to pick up over the next couple of months. So that, from a consumer insight point of view, I think is very interesting and certainly very, very topical right now. But slightly away from the main agenda that I want to cover today, which is more around kind of campaign measurement from a footfall point of view. So it's a product and service that Adsquare offer to the market in terms of understanding the impact of advertising across a variety of channels, what impact that has on driving visits to store. Now, this is a part of the market that I think many brands are desperate for it to be topical again. Lots of retailers who are struggling with their income because stores are closed and consumers aren't moving. They are very keen for this to be up and running and topical again. So one for the future perhaps, but one want to think about how you would go about setting up best practices for this kind of campaign. And this is, the thinking around this is very much focused around, I should have run a poll for this to see if anyone recognised this gentleman in the background. This is John Wanamaker, who is so often quoted in advertising presentations around not understanding which part of ad budgets don't work. We know some of it doesn't work, but we don't know which part it is that doesn't work. Now, these are advertising's known unknowns. And for a retailer, it's particularly important to understand that a huge proportion, I haven't seen the most recent stats, but it normally floats around the 85% mark of retail still takes place on the high street. The percentage of offline transactions is growing. I've seen that figure change a couple of percent over the last couple of years. I've worked in location for a while, but it still remains a huge proportion of retail transactions that happen on the high street. So for a bricks and mortar retailer to measuring their return on ad spend effectively, understanding what impact their ads across a variety of channels is having on driving footfall, on getting people into store, remains a challenge. And so to that end, I want to look at these 5 foundations. Now you as perhaps a brand or even an ad tech vendor offering this as a service measuring your own inventory, how you would best set up this kind of campaign. So I think first and foremost, this is important, it's using an independent source, making sure that the company you're working with to measure the effectiveness of that advertising for store visits has no other hidden agenda. They're not marking their own homework. They are a data provider. They have no interest in the media served. They have no particular skin in the game with the media. It makes no difference to them how successful that campaign was. They are a neutral and objective independent source and verification partner. You would expect the same thing in any other area. This is the reason that the likes of IAS, Moat, Double Verify exists within that part of the industry. It's because they're independent. Someone is making an objective view on that viewability and brand safety. Likewise, for footfall measurement, you want to make sure it's an independent partner and someone is not marking their own homework. So step 1, very important. Step 2, the right kind of movement data. This is potentially quite an in-depth subject matter, one that I'll try and simplify for 9:30 in the morning. But largely speaking, there are 2 different types of location data. One that will come from the bid stream, and one that will come from an app being installed in an SDK. It's important for you to understand the relative pros and cons of each of those, making sure that the data you're using to mark that homework is appropriate for what you're doing. So the flow for bid stream data is when an app publisher will share location data. It'll pass that through the programmatic chain to SSPs and DSPs to an ad tech vendor, and then that long becomes available. Now, the advantage of that is the level of scale that you'll get. So bid stream data will, in theory, see an awful lot of device IDs. So you'll get a big proportion of the population that way, which is really important. The payoff for that is that you may not see users very often. It relies on somebody being in an app and browsing an app that has permissions to share location data. And as such, you may only see somebody in one of the stores you're interested in, or you may even only see location data points once or twice a day. So it's a huge amount of scale perhaps, but the density of the data, the number of location events per user per day, can in theory be quite low on the other side. The alternative methodology here is background location data. So this again is where an app has an SDK installed. That app has a valid reason to be requesting location data. So it could be a navigation app, a weather app, dating app, etc. So there's a clear reason for the app to be requesting consumer location data, but that data is then collected in the background. So it's not reliant on somebody opening the app and physically using it and browsing on it. So whilst it will in theory collect a lower number of unique users versus Bidstream, the number of data points that it will collect will be much, much higher. Number of pins illustrated, it should be a visual representation of that, but you are likely to see more location pings and signals for each of those users versus Bidstream than you this way around. So in theory, you're more likely to see people at certain points of interest in certain retailers for conversion. So that's particularly useful. It's also worth considering it from a GDPR compliance point of view. Collecting lat long data in the Bidstream is a little bit of a grey area from a privacy point of view. Collecting it through SDKs is a much shorter, much cleaner consent process. The user is far more aware of what's being done with their data. So useful to understand both methodologies, relative pros and cons of scale and density and privacy and things like that. But definitely this is an area that you're going to be running campaigns for, something you should dig into in a lot of detail, ask a lot of questions, do your necessary due diligence, and make sure vendors are completing the right RFIs so you are comfortable with the data you're collecting, where it's come from, and the quality and the appropriateness of that data for the campaigns you're using it for. Number 3 is around POI, point of interest data. So there are a couple of key considerations here. So one is, excuse me, the accuracy of that data. Knowing an individual lat long for a location they're building is a good starting point, but if you're not then aware of the size of that building or the shape of that building, it becomes a little tricky, because you could drop a pin in the middle of this university, for example, and draw a uniform circle of a 50-meter radius, and of course you're picking up buildings either side of the street. So that is not the most effective way of tracking measurement. From a store driving point of view, that's fine, because you want people who are near that point of interest. But to understand that somebody's physically within a building, polygons become particularly important. Make sure you understand the exact dimensions and shape, and the kind of asymmetrical polygon shape of that building becomes hugely important, because then you can differentiate between the building you want and the building across the road, the building next door. So that becomes ever so important. Equally, from this point of view, an up-to-date point of interest list becomes important. Stores open and close on a fairly regular cadence. So if the data you have was accurate when you first received it, but then you've had the same data for 6 months a year, it's far less interesting, far less useful, because that store might have closed, that coffee shop might be replaced by a hairdresser, and you are using kind of false data from that point of view. So making sure that is accurate and up to date, very important. Point number 4, and this is where it looks at multi-channel. So the IAB becomes far and far more interested in all things digital, and that starts to encompass multi-channels. If you are a brand and all of your advertising is delivered to one particular end, and that is driving footfall into a bricks and mortar store, and you can only measure the impact of that on one channel, or perhaps even one or two publishers or vendors within that channel, it becomes a real silo. So if that's important, and that's the role that digital has to play within the channel, that's absolutely fine. But if all your media is inclined that way, but you can only measure one of them, then you're going to be missing an awful lot, and things won't be apples to apples. So if there is data out there, and if there are vendors out there that can help you measure a multitude of channels with the same methodology, so it can be compared and can help you understand incremental uplifts, that also becomes especially important. because you can understand the impact of your entire mix. And the metric, the outcome that you're working towards is store visit measurements. It allows not just in-flight optimization from a publisher point of view, but also from a channel perspective. So if that's what the brand is interested in, that's a key consideration. And then finally, point number 5. So once you've been through all of those, you've made sure you've picked an independent vendor, you've picked the right kind of data source, you've got your POI, right, you're measuring the appropriate channels. It then comes to the actual reporting, using that data, what it's for and how it can be best used. And that data can essentially be received in real time or post-campaign. Again, relative pros and cons to this, and it's what becomes the most important for you, your brand, your advertiser, your client. So to receive that data in real time has the obvious benefit of being able to make changes on the fly. To be able to look a week or two into the campaign, understanding which channels, which publishers, which strategies are the most effective at driving store visits and making those changes and improving the return on investment that you are getting out of your campaign, because you can make those very immediate changes. The downside with that is it's not giving you any kind of additional audience insights or uplift. So it's very immediate in the data it's providing, but it's perhaps not as deep or as rich as you might want it to be to inform future kind of audience planning. So on the flip side of that is receiving a post-campaign report, letting the campaign run, measuring the data, having that delivered to you, a couple of weeks after the campaign's finished with a post-exposure conversion window, and it will then tell you an awful lot more. It will tell you the uplift against the control group. It'll give you insight into how this affected your competitors, what kind of audience engaged with the ad or converted into store, what times of day people converted, how far they travelled, which stores sort of the best and the worst performance. There's an awful lot of data that can be used in there to understand the effectiveness of the channel, and in theory be used for future planning, so kind of feed back into the start for the campaign that runs the subsequent month. But it's no good for making campaign adjustments live. So perhaps in an ideal world you want to combine the two, but perhaps the campaign you're running has one particular metric more important than the other. And so there's a clear answer and a clear winner for you on this. But again, it's a case of understanding what is most appropriate for you in your particular situation, and making sure the vendor you work with is able to deliver on the right one for you. So just to wrap up then, just 2 case studies. So just to take a look at a couple of brands that have worked effectively in this space. So the first is a UK example. So this is where McDonald's work with OMD, and they're very interested in measuring the impact of their programmatic campaigns on driving foot traffic. So for them, it was all about the real-time footfall measurement product. So you're using Adsquare and Trade Desk as a DSP. They were able to run that campaign and then optimized towards best performing line items to increase that foot traffic. And they did that live. They made changes as the campaign went on, and they got what they wanted out of that. On the flip side, this is an out-of-home campaign that ran in Germany for the German equivalent of JCDecaux. So this is understanding if out-of-home and exposure could drive incremental store visits. So at this point, it became necessary to run a post-campaign report. They wanted very specifically to understand not only how many people went to store, but what's the incrementality of that? How many of those people would have gone anyway? Very interested in knowing that, in this case, 38% extra percentage people versus the control group actually went into store. So both of these campaigns had slightly different objectives in terms of measuring on the fly, understanding incremental uplift, and so it's necessary to run things in a different way, in a different campaign setup, to make sure that kind of level of data was appropriate for them. And so, I mean, that's largely it from me. I mean, I think in summary, footfall is an interesting place right now. Perhaps not front of mind from a measurement point of view for a lot of brands, given everything that is going on. it certainly will come back to the fore again for certain brand bricks and mortar retailers. But in the short term, the insight and understanding of consumer movement behaviour will become particularly key, as the government and as certain organisations are keen to kind of get the economy moving again. How people move out of home, where they go to, that will have particular impacts on consumer spending, consumer confidence, and driving the economy again. So two sides to use for this: insights and measurement. Both have their relative applications. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Andy. That was brilliant. And the tool you demonstrated earlier was really interesting. And I think after this, I know that I certainly am like kind of, really can't wait to get out. So yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that spikes in and what area it spikes in once this is all over. As a reminder, everyone, there is an opportunity to now ask questions, so please use the Q&A function if you have any. Andy, we did receive one question while you were speaking, and it was around point 3 of kind of those 5 points you just went through. And the question is, given the strict regulations on always-on data with iOS as an example, background SDK is becoming more difficult to obtain unless there's a great value exchange with the customer and the publisher apps. How has this affected you in terms of using background data in measuring store visits?
Yeah, that is completely true. So both iOS and more recently Android have made some changes to how they make consumers aware of when and how their location data is being used. So they've made some changes to the app policies and to the consumer notifications. So the part of the market that would have suffered largely here will be when apps were using consumer location data when there was no clear value exchange for that consumer. So if a calculator app asked me for my location, as a consumer, my first reaction would be, why the hell do you want or need that? No, absolutely not. I don't gain anything here. If a weather app or a navigation app ask me the same question, then you understand the value exchange. You're like, yes, of course, I need that data to be shared with the app publisher, app developer, in order for the app to function as I need it to. So it's very important that the apps being used demonstrate that value exchange and have a clear functionality. I think even one of the cases, I forget which one of the operating systems, actually require the developer to demonstrate a clear and obvious functionality and value exchange in order for them to be able to ask for it. So fortunately, from our point of view, we work with apps, functional apps. So the impact on that is not as great. There will have been a slight impact on the number of data points, because consumers have the option to say, you can use this all the time, or you can use it when I use the app. But largely, we weren't impacted on the number of apps that were able to share location. But it is something that both the operating systems have been quite focused on the last 6 to 9 months from a consumer privacy point of view. So it's an important question.
Yeah, it was a really great question, and a really great answer. And I think you're right. I think especially now there is more choice on what kind of settings you accept. So you mentioned you can have the option of track always, or track only while using in-app. And I think that's made the consumer more aware, and I totally understand that limits or can limit the data that you're receiving. So no, really interesting point. I guess I had one question, which was I guess I don't expect that there really would be an answer, but I would be interested to kind of discuss. Obviously, so right now we're talking about using location data for measurement purposes, but location data is often used for targeting as well.
Yeah.
Given that, so if you're using location data for targeting, and perhaps you're targeting someone because they're always in a certain area, how do you kind of distinguish whether that person was in the area and you targeted them because they were in that area versus they were in that area because you served them an ad?
I'll make sure I've understood that question properly. You're looking at cause and effect of...
Yeah, so like rather, did you serve them an ad and that's why they were there, or were they there and that's why you served them an ad? I'm not sure. You know what? I'll have to work out how I phrase that question. So I might come back to you on it after.
If I've understood correctly, I mean, if obviously it depends who's serving the ad, but if it's an ad that Adsquare have had a hand in serving, and we subsequently see someone in a place, that would more be an attribution piece for us, the cause and effect of, you saw an ad on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday we saw you in that retailer store. Where if it's the first time we've seen them there, or we've not seen them there for a while, then maybe it's a behavioural indicator rather than an attribution piece. Obviously, when someone is buying across disparate channels, it's hard to separate those two on ad exposures and what they've seen from which media area and which channel. But broadly speaking, that's how I would look at that. Assume I've understood the question properly.
Yeah, no, actually, that's a really good point. I guess, I think there's a lot of conversations generally about like different attribution models, and I think that's like another element that needs to be considered, which is I never thought of before. We have received one other question in the chat, which was, do you use a mixture of bid stream and SDK data for measurement?
It's a very short answer. No, it's SDK data only. I think a couple of years ago, before my time at Adsquare, it was a combination. I think GDPR made the business founders take a different view on that. So for at least a year, not 18 months, I think, it's been exclusively SDK data sourced directly from app publishers with raw data from apps that have that clear and obvious value exchange.
Great. Thanks so much. There are no other questions. Again, thank you so much. That tool you demonstrated as well was particularly interesting. And just for everyone on the call, we are going to be sharing slides after. So you should.
Yeah, please do feel free to go and check that out. It's a free tool, so fill your boots.
Great. Thank you. Well, I definitely know I just generally am quite interested in behaviour trends. So we'll definitely be using it. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thanks, Tina.
We will now hand over to our next speaker. So our next speaker is John Hatfield, head of advertising advertising and product at Shopck, who is going to be talking about mobile in-app advertising, how it differs from web advertising, and how, given that, how do you maximize your opportunities within an app? And I think that this topic is particularly important. So I'm just going to do a shout out to our launch of ad spend earlier this week. And within ad spend, we had identified that 56 of all ad spend is being spent on smartphone. So this conversation of in-app and making the most out of it is particularly important and relevant. So over to you, John, to give us more information.
Thanks, Tina. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yeah.
Perfect. Let me just share my screen. And yeah, thanks, Andy and Lisa. It's been really interesting listening to you guys this morning as well. Is my screen coming through okay, Tina?
Yes, we can see your screen and we can see you and hear you fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Wonders when technology works, eh? So yeah, good morning, everyone. My name's John, and I work at an app called Shopck. So for those of you who don't know it, it's a online mobile marketplace, and it's based all around what we like to call the circular economy. So this is allowing predominantly consumers to buy and sell things from each other. I guess some of the things that are slightly different about us is that we were started in app. We've always been focused on app, and we are moving more and more to a transactional marketplace where people can actually do all of this without having to even meet up. So they can buy and sell things using the app, payment, delivery, all of that is integrated. And that's been especially important, obviously, now, where if people want to, declutter their house, or they've got a few things they want to sell, being able to do that without having to even leave your house, where a courier turns up, takes it and delivers it to someone else is super important. So thankfully able to find a way to still hopefully help people do what they want to do even in these times. But yeah, unsurprisingly, I'm here to talk to you a bit about app. And I wanted to kick things off with a couple of polls. So hopefully this will work. If we can jump to the first poll.
Just to let you know, the guys hosting, the poll hasn't come up yet.
I'm not sure if it comes up for us or, yeah, we go.
There we go.
Excellent. So yeah, the first question is, how many app downloads were there globally in 2019? So total amount of downloads for app. Good, you can see people already answering. We've got a bit of a two-horse race going on at the moment. Oh, there is some contention for the third now. Give it another few seconds. Okay, I reckon we can call it there. So what did we have? We had 204 billion leading out, with then 133 with quite a large share of the votes. So the answer, majority of people getting that one right, 204 billion app downloads last year, which is quite a staggering amount. So yeah, it gives a bit of an idea of the amount of apps that are actually being consumed. Obviously, the amount of apps that people keep on their phones is another matter, and that's why apps have to really fight to be competitive. So if we hit up the second poll, this will be a question on the average, how much time do users spend per day on their mobiles? I think this data was done before the current times, so it may well have spiked a lot recently with everyone being trapped at home. Good, can see the answers coming in. I'm always horrified by these stats sometimes. I'm like, no, I can't possibly spend that amount of time on my phone. Right, yeah, let's, a few more answers. Okay, we'll call it there. So we had 4.2 hours. That is a truly shocking, shocking amount. The actual answer is 3.7, so still very, very high. But yeah, it just goes to show how much, you know, we don't need to remember this. I think we all know this already, but how much a part of our lives smartphones are, and how much time we spend on them. So yeah, thanks everyone for that. I guess the headlines would be the first two that we've just discussed, and then there's those are actual data points from last year, and then there is a predicted one that by 2021 mobile will account for nearly 75% of e-commerce transactions. So if people are buying things digitally, they're buying them on their phone generally, and this is a trend we only expect to increase. So it's where users are, and it's very important that that's where we're focusing our efforts from the digital media industry. So there's three topics that I want to talk to you about today: brand safety, creativity and data, and then the slightly dull but hopefully quite interesting, or dull sounding but interesting, bids, wins and impressions. But first, I think it's important just to remember where we came from. So years ago, this is probably what the advertising industry would generally look like. I feel like things have changed unrecognizably even in the past, say, 10 years. And most of my day feels like this, staring at a overly complicated machine that I kind of know what it's meant to do, but I'm never sure what every part of it does. So hopefully this rings true to a lot of people on the call. So yeah, first one we're going to talk about here is brand safety. So the topic that I want to start with was ads.txt, or in this case, appads.txt. Hopefully most of you will have already heard of this initiative. For anyone who hasn't, the idea was it's there to help prevent fraud. So what you would have is, say you have some sort of bot network or fraudulent sites, or even sites that no one would put ads on because their content is deemed not brand safe. They would have to find a way to try and get ads on their page. So what they'd often do is mimic a well-known site, and they'd pass their requests into the system pretending to be this well-known reputable media owner. The problem for the buyer was that they couldn't actually tell if this was or wasn't the site they wanted. So say, for example, you know, the buyer was trying to buy Shopck. It comes through saying it's Shopck. How do they know that that's actually Shopck? Same as if you're in a marketplace and you wanted to know, are the goods you're buying genuine or are they counterfeit? And the way the industry went about solving this was quite elegantly simple, actually. It was just to have a list. So if you want to buy Shopck, there is a list on the Shopck platform. of these are all the places you can buy our ads. On web, this is pretty simple because you just put the list on your domain, so shopck.com/ads.txt. For app, it was a little bit different because not every app has a website, or we don't even know what website is associated to an app, because when the request comes through, all people will see is the app ID. So that's where the I guess where the difference comes into it. So if you want to find out what an app ID is, it's pretty simple. You can either go to the App Store or the Play Store, and when you go to find the app, the ID will actually be in the URL. And anyone who's used to buying apps will know that this ID is then how you identify those requests across the chain. So this was the kind of the common place, I guess, of where you could go and find information about the app. And what the industry did was then have the link down here that's to the developer website. So then this is how you could find the relevant storage place for this brand list, this safety list, the app ads.txt, is through that link. So then what the buying platform does is it finds the app ID, comes to this page, goes to that destination, and then behind it, it can then find these are the platforms that I can buy that publisher's ads from, safe in the knowledge that they are the ads that I want and they're brand safe then. So yeah, anyone who is in the process of selling inventory, hopefully you're already on board with this initiative. Anyone who's buying, I'd strongly advise, not just with app, but with everything, to try and make sure you always buy ads.txt or ads.txt authorized inventory. It will very much help minimize any risks of fraud and brand safety issues. So, know your apps. Sounds like a pretty, I would say a pretty basic thing, but for anyone who hasn't already started buying app inventory, go out there and try and start curating yourself a list, like creating a whitelist essentially. Look at the web platforms you already buy inventory on, and then start to look if they have apps and check out the apps, see what positions you might want to run on there. Maybe consider adding in a few pure play apps as well. I think there's some good cases of exchanges and DSPs actually already starting to do this work. So yeah, it's for anyone who's not already buying apps, I think this is a good entry point. And one last thing that I guess I'd call out is there's also lots and lots of other ways that you can keep brand safe, whether it's the IAB gold standard or projects like content URL from Google. And yeah, essentially app is more or less gaining parity with some of the features that you have in web, so you can keep yourself safe or keep your brand safe. So, second point that I wanted to talk to you guys about today was creativity and data. And the good news is some things remain the same on app. So if you have standard formats, if you've got your 300 by 250s, most apps will still take these sizes. So you don't need any special creatives to start advertising in app. You can just go straight ahead and start adding them into campaigns. The one important thing, I guess, to consider is that native is regarded as essentially a much better way of running ads in app. The reason being, apps like to be fast, and native assets are very small, so they can load quickly, and also they can actually be rendered within the app itself without having to have a web view. So on the left-hand example where we have a standard ad, the way the app renders that, because the app code is different from normal web code, is it has to create like a small browser essentially inside the app where it can show you the ad. This takes up memory and takes up essentially processing power. So if possible, what apps like to do is they like to just be delivered the image, the text, all of the assets that make a native ad, and they can then render them in their app code. And this keeps everything fast, makes user experience better. And there's actually some apps out there that don't support standard formats at all. So if you are moving into doing more focus in app, you should try and make sure every campaign that you have does have some sort of native creative component to it. Obviously, it won't work necessarily for every instance, and you may have to start thinking about that. But I think generally all campaigns are running on, say, social, where they have native assets. So yeah, it's an important factor to consider. Full screen. I think the best way I ever thought about this was if I was on a website, not on mobile at all, just on a desktop or laptop, and I had a full screen ad appear on that, I would probably be pretty horrified. But for some reason, when I'm in an app particularly, and I go through an experience where I have a full screen ad come up, I'm not actually horrified. I almost expect it to be a part of the experience, and as long as it's done well, it's really not that jarring at all. And in some cases, I think there's excellent examples of it being used really well, particularly in gaming, where you've got things like rewarded creatives, where then users can unlock something, and there is a real clear value exchange. Like advertising's always been about the value exchange, where you have to see ads, and in exchange you're getting something. But that's not as implicit, you know. You when you're in a game or you're interacting with a rewarded creative, then it's much more obvious. I have to watch this ad, and in exchange I get this thing. And I think that's a really good example of how you can actually use what could be seen as really quite intrusive and invasive creatives, but in a way that users are actually very happy with, and in some cases quite positive about. And when we do our user testing, it's very interesting seeing how people react to this. So yeah, I guess the points to make there is that there is a lot of option for being quite creative, whether it's with full screen videos or even interactive ads, playable games. There's a lot to be exploring in that area. And then the last bit I wanted to talk about, which is a huge area and probably could actually do a whole presentation on, but I'm trying to give an overview of all the key topics that then hopefully inspires a bit more digging from everyone. And this is audience data. So apps, again, I think if you go back 5 years or so, maybe people had a conception that they didn't cover a broad demographic, especially if you're talking about gaming. I think people's perception of gaming is generally a certain type of age and person, when actually when you look at it, it's incredibly broad, not just in gaming but apps. And I think a good example would be my gran is a gamer. Now, it's not to say that she's playing Fortnite, but she's definitely playing bridge on an app on her phone that has ads. So I think the lesson there is that no matter what kind of users you're looking for, they will exist on app and you will be able to find them. And the other important piece about that is that generally speaking, apps have a high percentage of logged in users because of the way they function. And this means that typically those media owners that are using apps will have very rich data sets, whether it's the location data that, you know, Andy was just talking about, or if it's actual consumer purchase intent data, which is the data that we have a lot of because it's what users are searching for, what they're buying, or, you know, demographic data from their profile info. And I guess the biggest distinction point there in terms of how app works is that it doesn't use cookies. Not going to talk about cookies because it's a subject that's well trodden, I guess, and I think Lisa already did a really good justice earlier. So the key difference is just that there's mobile ad IDs. There's not cookies. They function in some different ways. For example, mobile ad IDs, you only have one. So if I'm a cookie, if I'm in a web environment and I have a cookie on me, that might be value 123. The SSP might know me as 456, and the DSP might know me as 789. This can present problems because they will have to match up those IDs in order to recognize me as me. Whereas in mobile apps, I'm 123 to every user in the chain. So you don't have this issue of match rate where you start off with a pool of, 10,000 users, and by the time you've actually got down to activating it, it's shrunk to say 6,000 or 7,000. With mobile ad IDs, then it's a one-to-one relationship. So generally the match rate is 100%. And then the last area that I wanted to talk about, which I said sounded dull, but hopefully is going to be interesting, is bids, wins, and impressions. So with the slightly riddle-like title of when is an impression not an impression? I think this is a really important topic because it's such a basic metric, but there's numerous ways you can count an impression. Years ago, it just used to be in response. So whenever an ad server replied to a request for an ad and said, yep, here's an ad, it counted an impression then. It had no idea if the ad had even landed on the page or the app. It just said, yep, I sent it. That's good enough for me. And the change, I think most platforms about 3 years ago went to counting on download, which was a good step forward. So that was where the ad server would actually wait for the response, essentially, that, okay, that creative that I've sent out has landed on the web page or has landed in the app. I know it was delivered and received, so at least I know where it was going. But then you have other metrics such as 1-pixel render and viewable impressions, and it's very important to consider how these are used in different environments. So to put an example here, if we look at stage 1, a user is in the app and there is an ad. It's already won in the auction and it's been delivered into the app, but it's off screen. It's about, let's say it's about 200 pixels down below. Then the user starts to scroll, and in stage 2, we can see the ads just about coming into view. And if the user continues to scroll, we get to stage 3, the ad's fully in view. Now, in most cases in web environments, an impression is counted stage 1. So as soon as you've won the auction and your creative is delivered onto the page, an impression is counted. In app, we don't actually count. And then again, this is, I guess, the caveat. It's in the majority of scenarios. There are some platforms that do work differently, but for the most part, it's counted at stage 2. It's when the ad has just started to come into view. So this was what I was referring to in 1-pixel render. As long as at least 1 pixel of the ad has come onto the visible screen, that is when an impression is counted. So there is a really important difference there between, say, web and app environments. And obviously on 3, as long as you've got 50% of the ad in view for at least 1 second, that's when you're counting your viewable impression, if you're using the standard measurements. So why is there this difference? Well, again, back to the similar topic that we already mentioned, apps like to be fast. User experience is generally key to apps, and users should be able to move through an app quite quickly because it's all there. They're not waiting for elements of it to download. So similarly, that's what you want to do with your ads in an app. You want them to be ready and waiting for a user. So the problem with this in years ago was that it meant you had a really high amount of non-viewable ads. Not because you were doing anything wrong and loading ads where you shouldn't be, but you weren't sure exactly which path the user was going to go down. So you had to have ads ready on both. And this meant that the apps pre-cached a lot of their ads. So to try and combat this problem of it creating a lot of non-viewable and non-performant inventory, there was a shift, and impressions were counted then instead on 1-pixel render because it was seen as a much fairer way. So in some ways, I actually think this is a better way of doing things than what the general standard practice is in web. And it gives a much fairer process to the buyer for sure. But like we say, important to factor this in because it can impact all of your metrics from CTR to viewability. And this is a real world example of how one of those how this kind of impact manifested itself on a PMP that one of the team at Shopck was dealing with. So a buyer came to us and they'd said, hey, I'm bidding on web. I'm bidding what I think is a fair price. Let's say in this case, I bid 4 million times, but I won 3.2 million impressions. So that's, from their point of view, that was good. They were happy with that. They had a win rate of 80%. But then when they were bidding an app, again, they thought they were bidding at what they determined was a fair price. In this case, let's say $1.40. They were bidding 4 million times, but they said, we're only seeing 800,000 impressions. Why is our win rate so low? And they said, oh, we tried increasing our bid, and the win rate only went up a tiny percent, and then we increased it even more, and the win rate still was really low. And the thing here was that there was not all of the data was being looked at, I guess. There was just this straight comparison between impressions and bids. And the piece that was missing in between was actually how many times they'd won in the auction. So the way to think about this is on the previous slide where we had stage 1, 2, and 3. In stage 1, they have won the auction and they are sitting in the app, but they will only trigger an impression when the ad comes into view on the screen. So that's why we've created kind of this other column that says the real win rate. So if you're buying or if you're selling and you're trying to help your buyers understand things, it's really important to understand what metrics to look at here, because actually increasing the CPM wasn't the right thing to do. The optimal thing to do in this strategy, and what we advised the buyer, was actually go back to your original CPM, and you can then increase your bid rate. And that will actually be the most effective way of you winning more impressions, because you were actually winning when you were competing, but you have to take into account the nuances of app that you're only paying for an ad when it's rendered on the screen. Hopefully that made sense. It was I was trying to think of the best way to sort of describe a real world use case of this, and this was quite a good example. But if there are any questions,
can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's because I was about to pull out a calculator, but actually maybe other people have the same question. Could you just talk about which cells are being calculated together to get win rate versus real win rate?
Sure, absolutely. So here, the win rate is a combination of impressions divided by bids. So out of how many times you bid, did you actually serve an impression? So this is what many people I've seen use as a win rate, because it represents, okay, this is how many times I bid, and this is when I actually pay for an ad. That could be determined your win rate. I think in web, you would see very little difference between the amount of times you win and an impression. But when we've put this other column in here, real win rate, this actually doesn't have anything to do with the impression. It is representative purely of how many times you won divided by the amount of times you bid. And that's important, because that is the thing to consider when you're looking at what price you're bidding at, because you can't affect when the user scrolls and your ad comes into view based on price. So if we're talking about what price we should be bidding, then we shouldn't really be looking at impressions. We should be looking at the amount of times it's called different things in different platforms. I know Google calls this matched, others call it won. But that's the important one, and I guess the way I'm saying it should be used is when calculating of CPMs and prices. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
No worries. I should have had some formulas in there as well. So yeah, that's one example of a way that we should be aware of the differences of how app works, and as long as we calculate for them, it's not a problem at all. But we just have to be aware of these things. And the other point that I wanted to make sure people were aware of is that for a lot of apps, they had a slightly older way of monetizing, in terms of many of them used a network model for a long time. For anyone who's not familiar with this is the old school way of programmatic, if you could call it programmatic, where you had partners in a waterfall. And you would call the first partner, they sell an amount of your inventory, whatever's left you give to the second partner, and then whatever's left you give to the third partner, and so on. I think the reason this was quite common in app was generally apps didn't have as much resource as, say, some of the big media owners that had grown up on advertising. So they were just happy to monetize whatever way they could. But there is definitely a big shift these days towards most apps focusing on achieving a proper unified auction, not having waterfalls and having everyone compete as one. If you're an app publisher, media owner, hopefully you're already on the process of trying to move towards this, or already having moved towards this. And if you're buying, I think the key thing, no different to web, is looking at your supply path and trying to optimize it. Looking which partners give you the best access, the best win rates, and if possible, trying to find out if you're buying an app and there are multiple ways of buying it, whether it's direct, real-time bidding, proper unified auction, or networks. Chances are you probably do want to go the real-time bidding route.
John, we've just had a question. So
yes.
Is it fair to say then that in an in-app environment, win rate should be renamed, or at least be considered to be renamed to something like impression rate?
So I think this is where everyone always has different terms for things. And I think win rate for me should represent the amount of times you win in an auction. So that's why maybe win rate shouldn't be anything to do with impressions. Yeah, there should be a different word used for that. The word that a lot of platforms use is to define the difference between when you win and when you serve an impression, is your render rate, because that is then indicative of how many, the percentage of times when you have an ad in the app, is it rendered on the screen. So these are the two metrics that actually we tend to talk about and look at. Is a win rate is when you have competed in an auction and you were the highest bidder and you won. And your render rate is how many times out of winning did you actually serve an impression and have to pay for it and serve an ad and have a chance of being in front of the user. It is named differently in some platforms, but certainly from the people, the partners that we deal with and the people that we talk to, this is typically how we talk about it. Hopefully that helps.
Great, thanks.
No worries. Good question though. And then the last point I wanted to run through was the Open Measurement SDK. I won't try and explain exactly how it works, but think of it as most measurement software was built in web. It relies on web code. If app is written in a different code, these two things can't talk to each other. So when the measurement software is delivered with the ad, it's trying to work out, is the ad on the screen? And because it can't see the screen, it can't talk to its surroundings like it can in a browser. It has no idea. And the problem there was that in order for that to change, each measurement partner had to get an app to integrate their own SDK so then they could talk to the app. And this isn't practical. Apps don't want to be integrating tons of different SDKs from different partners. It makes their apps large, heavy, and more prone to breakage. So this was an initiative that IAB Tech Lab came up with. And the best way to think of it is like a translator. So it's the point that sits in between the app and the measurement partners that allows for there to be just one integration to talk then to all of the multiple measurement partners. And all a measurement partner needs to do is then make sure they've integrated with the Open Measurement SDK. They learn to listen to its signals, and then you can track your impressions correctly. You can track viewability, and you're then competing on a level playing field and seeing the same metrics that you'd see in web. So yeah, if you have an app, then you need to make sure that either your mobile SDK already includes this for advertising, or you need to integrate it separately. And if you're buying, I would definitely say make sure you're using a partner that has the Open Measurement SDK already integrated. So to sum things up, I guess if I had to give it in three kind of key takeaways, I'd say consumers are spending more and more time in app. This is where attention is. So this is where we should be focusing our efforts. Understanding the differences is definitely key to success. There are some differences, and yeah, as long as you factor them in, you can then leverage this area, and there's massive growth for those who adapt. And we've seen that for some of the big companies, Google, Facebook. These guys who really went hard into app have been reaping the rewards. And yeah, it's time for everyone to kind of get on board with that and start getting in on those benefits too. So yeah, thanks very much. I don't know if there are any other questions, Tina, or if anyone else has any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great. We have got one question. However, I think it's more directed to IAB because it's talking about the adoption rate of the OM SDK. We have actually run out, so I don't know the answer.
I can give a quick answer on this if you want.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah.
So originally the Open Measurement SDK was a standalone thing. When we first integrated it, we had to do it with IAB Tech Lab. At that point, the adoption rates were a lot lower, but it was seen as such a positive initiative that Google, who is a significant chunk of the mobile ad industry, actually integrated it inside their own SDK. So any partner that's using Google to monetize their app, chances are the Open Measurement SDK is already there because it's built into the Google SDK as of the end of last year. I'd have to double check exactly on the dates, but yeah, so there is nowadays a significant proportion of the app inventory already has this. And then in terms of which measurement partners are already integrated with the SDK, it's pretty easy to find. You just go to their site and have a look. And failing that, if you're not sure, you can always ask your measurement partner if they're integrated with it. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's a really useful answer. I didn't actually know that about the Google SDK, so that's great to know. And yeah, just to direct the person who asked this question to the Tech Lab website. So the numbers that we know is that over 2 million apps have adopted the OM SDK. There are some that have their implementation certified, so you can check out the list of those on the Tech Lab website. And then, as John mentioned, the vendors that are registered to the OM SDK are publicly listed as well. Ooh, let me sorry, just realised I wasn't showing myself there. With that, I'm going to hold the line there for any further questions, just given that we are running out of time here, or have gone over. But before I say goodbye to you all, firstly, thank you for staying with us to the end. Just to let you know, this was part 1 of the event. Part 2 is next Wednesday. It will be hosted by the lovely Dom Tilson, him here from the IAB. So next Wednesday, if you are registered, if you're not registered already, you can do so on the page here. And I also, just given the audience, wanted to do a shout out to our user identity webinar on the 21st of May. This is also going to be a part 1 and part 2 event. So kind of broadening on some of the topics that were covered by Lisa in the first presentation. So if this is a topic that's of interest to you, then please do register. Just a reminder, and hopefully you've all seen it in the chat, but there is a feedback form that we've been shared in the chat. If I could please ask you all to complete it. It just helps us to ensure that we continue to deliver you great content. But with that, I will just say thank you all for joining. Thank you for staying to the end. And thank you to our speakers. And we look forward to seeing you at part 2. Bye, everyone.